Welcome to Pat O'Keefe's World of Curiosities, and tonight we have a special show for you, and it's certainly appropriate for the time of the year. Zeea, what's on the docket tonight?
All right, thank you all for watching another episode of Zeea and Pat's Witchy Wisdom. Tonight we're going to be talking about Appalachian kitchen witchery. There's a lot of different things that, can go into that. As Appalachians and growing up with our moms and grandmas in the kitchen, they bestowed a lot of wisdom onto us of how we could make our dishes taste a little better, and how Appalachian people are naturally very resourceful. That's what I feel anyway, because you had to use what was available to you and make sure you used and reused things, like, for example, bacon grease. Stuff like that was something you could use, save it and use for other dishes. I know my mama definitely did that, or put like fat back and stuff in her beans for flavor, stuff like that. But we're also going to talk about maybe some of the more magical things in the kitchen as well. Also superstitions can kind of play into that as well. Like, I'll just go ahead and say a couple off the bat. So, obviously, if you spill salt, throw that over your shoulder. And the reason for that was, if the devil was behind you, getting his eyes, or, it was for like to protect you from bad luck. And I've also heard, like, if you make cornbread, to not cut into it because that was bad luck, that you were supposed to take a pinch off of it. And then I thought maybe that was the reason why some families make the cornbread muffins instead. But the best way to make cornbread, of course, you got to have your cast iron pan, and you got to heat it up real good in the oven with, I guess you would use lard. That's what my mama would use anyway, or oil. And heat it up real good first before you put your batter in there. That's the secret to having that crispy crust on there. And also, I wanted to say that our fellow Appalachian witch Byron Ballard had mentioned that a well-seasoned cast iron pan can be used to scry in, because if you get it real nice and black and shiny, that you could use it for scrying. So what do you have to say about cast iron pans?
Cast iron pans, it was part and parcel of the Appalachian kitchen and still is. I've got a bunch of them over there that I use. In fact, one of them is my great great granny's, which is really cool because it means it's my granddaughter's. What is that? Great. I mean, it's what, 3 or 4 greats back. So, it's one of the things that you would hand down in families. And you were talking about how we made do with things. It was like, not only did we make do with things, but we kept things, and we took care of them, like our cast iron pans. One of the things that could give an old granny woman a heart attack is to see somebody put their prized cast iron pan that they had carefully, put the oil in and rubbed it in a thin, it has to be very thin layer, and then put it in the oven, and on a high temperature in order to cure it. And then you see somebody throw it into water in the sink. I mean, right? They're twitching. So you took care of what you had because it's cast iron. It's so easy to, for that water to destroy a cast iron pan. But you were talking about making do in general. I got to tell you, one time we got off the bus, my sister and I, Pam, and I will never forget. Oh, I'll never forget this. She went roaming into the kitchen. Of course, it's after school, so she's hungry. And I heard a blood-curdling scream. So I go running into the kitchen, and there she is, standing in front of 3 hog heads that were given to us, right? I mean, that was considered quite the gift. And of course, Granny came into the kitchen. She said, "What y'all hollering about?" And Pam said, "Oh my God, Grandma, there's 3 hog heads like lined up, like something out of a slasher movie." And Granny said, "Now that's good eating." She said, "You got them hog cheeks." She said, "Don't you forget." Pam, I'll never forget this. She said, "We eat everything but the squill," and that's true. And we old Appalachian people. I'll never forget. We were in the kitchen one time. My sister must have a very weak stomach, and I'll never forget this. We were over her big old cauldron, literally a cauldron on the old wood stove, cast iron, of course. And Pam's going, "That smells so good." Well, it was Granny's chicken and dumplings. Nothing got better than Granny's chicken and dumplings. So we're both standing by that old store stove. Now remember, we're cooking on this stove in the middle of summer. It's just the way it was before we got the electric stove in. So anyway, Pam's looking, and all of a sudden these chicken feet pop up. Bing! Like, and Granny was there hearing Pam, talk about it. She said, "Now don't forget, Pam, we eat everything but the cluck." So, I mean, we literally, ate everything except the noises that the animals made because we made do with absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And to prove her point, I will never forget this, to my sister. She took these tongs, got out one of the chicken feet, and went like this. Like she was actually eating those
Yeah.
chicken feet. It was so funny. So that's my granny. So when we talk about making do in the kitchen, it was, and in the household, it was truly that. And we were very poor. And so, that had been a gift from an old farmer who had butchered his pigs, his hogs. And it always occurred during the fall, usually, hog killing. And so, he gifted us with those. And Granny she made, have y'all ever heard of head cheese?
Yeah.
Hog cheese, that's what she made out of it, which is kind of like a homemade version, if you will, of a meat, sandwich meat, because we would slice that and put it on sandwiches or
Yeah.
just eat it. And it was fried up. It was surprisingly good. It really was.
Yeah.
And of
You
course,
know, as growing up as a kid, they would eat stuff, like hog jaw and stuff like
oh
that.
yeah.
I was very picky, so I never really it got to eat and experience a lot of that. But one of the most like common, well, to me and my family, it was like kraut. So that was like, and I realized that was kind of traced back to Germany. But yeah, sauerkraut's really good for you. It's probiotics in it. It's good for your gut health. But, people would do a lot of stuff like planting by the signs, but they would do other stuff by the signs too. And you're not supposed to make your kraut when the sign is in Pisces, because Pisces rules over the feet. And so that your kraut would not turn out good and it would be stinky, I guess, like feet. But we were talking about like hog killing and stuff. And, also they would use that lard or like the tallow from the animal and ash and make a big fire outside with a cauldron and use that to make lye soap with it.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
Granny she had a huge cauldron outside, and that's exactly what she did. She'd make lye soap, and I think she made it like twice a year. And when she did, she'd stock up, for the next 6 months. When she did that, yeah, these women, I mean, they had to. There was no running to the store like we know it today. And not everybody had a car. I remember there was an old man, he drove a truck, and he would deliver food out of the back of that truck. It was like a rolling general store, right? And I asked him one time, I said, "Are you ever going to retire?" And he said, "Pat," he said, "how can I retire?" He said, "I got people up in these mountains," and he said, "they don't have any way to town." And so, he kept that up. So he would bring them groceries and what they needed outside of what they could can
Yeah.
or create on their own. Because these old people, they were very ingenious. Let me give you a quick recipe that my mom fixed. And let me show you something. And this is something that's really special. I have several books that whoops, losing
Uh-oh.
stuff. But my mother and my grandmother did all hand. I don't know if you can see that, but they are all handwritten, which is just amazing. And it's got their favorite recipes. So these were recipes that I actually ate growing up. And one of them is milkweed green beans. Now I'm going to tell you, this is in my mama's words. Take young, tender milkweed stalks, remove leaves, cut into pieces, and wash. Cook with pieces of smoked bacon until tender, salt to taste. Serve as a vegetable. Tastes like very young green beans. Because, sometimes you didn't have those green beans, but you might have old milkweed outside.
Huh, I've never heard of that. I think that's super interesting. I'd like to maybe try that because I did
Yeah.
see some milkweed close by with some butterflies on it, so they really like that. Apparently, it has it's got like a vanilla scent. The flowers do anyway. But
Well, don't forget now, remove the leaves, okay, before you do it. But and don't eat the roots either. It's definitely just the stalks, is what she's saying.
yeah, yeah, you definitely had to be really resourceful in Appalachia. Definitely in the old times because, yeah, like you said, the terrain was very rough, and the pioneers that lived there had to be tough people to, you know, survive through the winter and grow and then can their own food.
Hmm.
But were certain staples, of course, of every household. So you had flour, sugar, and salt, pepper, and there's a lot of stuff you could do with just that. And one of the most easy things you could do was also your bacon grease that you kept, or you can use butter. I use butter, okay, but you can make gravy. That's simple, and you gotta have milk too, of course. Everybody always had milk too, especially if you had cows or your neighbor did. Um, but one of my mama's recipes that all the grandkids, my cousins, liked was chocolate gravy. And that was a specialty she'd fix if we'd sleep over. And so in the morning she'd make, uh, biscuits and gravy. And then also she would make the chocolate gravy. And her recipe for that, she used a whole stick of butter. And then you put your 3 tablespoons of flour. And then you put 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And that was something you could get relatively easy too. And you got to have sugar, of course. And she said, put a little pinch of salt in there too to bring out that flavor of the chocolate and make it a little bit more sweet. Then I guess if you wanted, you could add a little vanilla, but then that's getting a little bit carried away. But you put that on a biscuit and it's really good.
Hmm. Yeah, now I make vanilla, but vanilla, as far as the actual plant, it was very hard to get in the
Yeah,
mountains, so they
yeah,
were lucky if they were able to get it. But now
exactly.
I do make my own vanilla, and it's so simple, folks. All you have to do is get yourself, I use vodka, but you can use anything that you want. A bourbon is supposed to give it kind of a caramelized taste. And then you pour it. I do the smaller, pint jars, and then you stuff it full of vanilla bean. And remember to cut the vanilla bean down the middle and put plenty in. And then you shake it every month or so. Actually, I try to do it about once a month, and you get the most beautiful vanilla, and I just love it. In fact, I'm getting ready to do another batch. I think I've got 4 pints left because I do give them as gifts also. So yeah, it's we if we can make it in the kitchen, we prefer it. But things have changed, and it's much easier now for folks than it was back in the day. But I promise you, my granny would have made her own vanilla if she could have.
Yeah, that would be good. So, I don't know if this is just, I guess everybody all over makes casseroles, but I feel like that's kind of a Southern and Appalachian thing, but not super unique to the South. But that's something that is easy to make, and you can kind of whip it up with, any ingredients you have and feed a lot of people because that was important to make something like fast and simple to feed
Hmm.
your family. But like my mama's specialty, I feel, is making desserts. If there's a new dessert recipe, she wants to try it out, and that's one of her hobbies she likes to do. I'm blessed to have my mama still with me. She just turned 80 this year, and today she just got her a new stove, by the way, since we're talking about cooking, and I need to call her and ask her if she's excited about her new stove. But one of my things I like that she makes is just super simple. Again, real simple, but good. And that's a cobbler. And another word for that is a sonker. I was asking her, I'm like, what's the difference difference between a cobbler and a sonker? And she's like, nothing really, I don't think. I think it's just different people calls it different things. But basically, all you do is just get your, fruit, whatever kind of fruit you wanted. But one of the common ones that I always liked growing up was strawberry rhubarb, because the strawberry and the rhubarb are both a little bit tart, so it's good to put that extra sugar on there. So she said, sprinkle it with a little sugar, and then you mix up your batter, which just basically consisted of flour, milk, sugar. I think that's about, there wasn't really much to it. And then you just mix that up, pour it over the berries, and bake it, and then it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I remember going out with Granny, blackberry hunting, as she called it, and she would say, "Now, Pat, always remember, anywhere there's berries, there's snakes." Because of the birds, right? The snakes are there for the birds. But one of the things, like you said, a lot of these recipes, and we'll show you this one in her own handwriting, and that's Granny's, was cabbage casserole. And let me tell you how easy it was. It was like, pound of ground beef, you had some chopped onions, you had some tomato soup, and of course the chopped cabbage. And, you put all that together and you baked it in the stove. Now, Granny, because I hated like onions, like if they weren't cooked through or caramelized, I just couldn't at that age. And so she would always cook them up, and then she put them in, stir it up, make sure it was nice and even. And it was really delicious. It really was. I mean, these old recipes, one of Mom's favorite canon recipes, because it was my favorite. So I guess it made it her favorite, if you know what I mean. She knew we loved it, so she always fixed a bunch of it. But she would take old hot dogs and she would pickle those hot dogs along with some peppers and a little onion. And, like I said, it was a pickle recipe. And she'd pickle them hot dogs, put them away. And I swear she could never put away enough jars for us girls. We would just eat the heck out of those. We would just eat them right up.
Yeah. Pickled eggs is kind of a big thing. I always remember my papa loved pickled eggs. I have never tried one. When I was little, like I said, I was too picky. I'm like, this is weird. But I'd try one now. Another thing, the other recipe I was going to tell you, well, like I said, you got to be resourceful and reuse stuff. So if you made mashed potatoes and you wanted to make something
Hmm.
kind of, reuse them the next day, but you didn't want to you have the same thing, have completely a leftover, but you want to change up a little bit, you could make tater cakes. Or,
Hmm.
in the summertime when you've got a lot of squash growing in your garden, it usually takes over. So a lot of the time in the summer, we'll have squash patties. So,
Hmm.
and they're made similarly, tater cake, squash patties, it's the same sort of thing. You've got flour in there. But the thing with the tater cakes, okay, you're going to want to put an egg with it and some flour, and then your seasonings. You can also put cheese in it if you want. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing about if you reheat taters is that it's actually better for you. It's like better for your gut health and doesn't spike your blood sugar like a fresh made one would. Like if it's cooled down and reheated, it's actually a lot better for your digestion and helpful. But my mama's secret to her squash patties, though, is when you cut up the squash, you got to, get that moisture out of them first. And then she says sprinkle a little bit of sugar to help that sweet flavor of the squash come out. And I was like, well, that's a good tip. I never did that. But you could
Hmm.
also make, like how I was talking about casseroles, you could make a squash casserole that way as well. Just add sugar or I mean, just add some crunched up Ritz crackers on top and some cheddar
Hmm.
cheese too, of course. Maybe some mayonnaise in there too. And pies are a big thing, I feel like, in Appalachia in the South. Have you ever had a tomato pie?
Oh, yes, ma'am, I sure have, and they are good. And you mentioned pies. Fried hen pies, fruit pies
Yeah.
were a big deal. If they weren't making those blackberries into like a cobbler, you'd be getting a fruit pie. And oh, I love those things. Granny would fry them up. They'd be so crunchy on the outside and tender and so easy to make. I mean, basically, it was a fresh fruit and then or even canned fruit, and then they would add a little sugar, and then basically just fry it right up, and in a nice dough that she would make by hand. I mean, so good. But let me tell you, we can't get out of here without talking about what we ate just about every other day, and that was brown beans and fried taters.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure they all do it a little differently. You've mentioned, that yours would put that bacon grease in. You put a little
yeah,
bacon grease in. You put bacon. You put whatever you had, smoked whatever you had, right? And then you would salt and pepper, and if you had a little garlic powder, you'd put that in, and you
yeah,
know. Just whatever suited your fancy. And then on those fried taters, they would be, you had to have your leftover bacon grease for that, because that's what made fried taters. And the same thing, you wanted them nice and thin. That she always fixed them nice and thin so they'd be crispy. And then you chop them up and throw them in a pan that was already hot. And that pan would always have to be a cast iron pan. So nice, hot cast iron pan. And then, if you were lucky enough to have some bacon, you had that bacon chopped up, you would put that in. And of course, you would have some chopped onion and put that in, salt and pepper. But we lived on that. That was probably
yeah.
our main meal, and we probably had it probably at least 3 times a week.
Yeah, that is definitely I was remembering being a kid and sitting at the table with my family, and that's what Papa would have a glass of buttermilk, and he would break up his cornbread and put in there, and
Mm-hmm.
then they would have like pinto beans, the fried taters, and they'd have like mustard greens and put vinegar on them. And like I said, when I was little, I was like, I don't eat that. And then sometimes they'd have kraut, but they'd have like those green onions and just eat them raw, and that was really
Mm-hmm.
good for your health.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that was the common food for the new year. I know we might have talked about that in our superstitions episode, which y'all need to go back and watch that. If you're Appalachian, you're definitely going to relate to a lot of those. But we got the collard greens that represented money for the new year, and we had the hog jaw representing, good health, and the beans representing, yeah, health, luck, money, and yeah, we had a black eyed peas. Is what you would have though on the new year, but usually
Mm-hmm.
the other time of year you'd have the pinto, and
Mm-hmm.
some people call those soup beans, and
Mm-hmm.
like to put onions on top. But
Yeah, because
yeah,
a lot of people liked them soupy, right? I mean,
hmm
they had this nice broth that, just keeping them on the fire all the time. In fact, you knew that the beans, and this actually happened, you knew the beans were no longer fit to eat whenever it started bubbling up like lava. I kid you not.
getting too sick, I guess.
Yeah, it was time to throw them away.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
but
All right.
I wanted to bring around to maybe more of like the witchery aspect that we can do, so you can, whenever you're stirring your soup or whatever clockwise or your tea, be putting your intentions into it of health or, luck, prosperity, whatever you're doing, use cinnamon for prosperity, um, drawing prosperity to you. And you can use stuff like catnip that also draws things to you, prosperity and love. And if you want to banish something, like you would stir counterclockwise, like to banish illness if you're trying to heal somebody, things like that. And you implement different herbs and spices in your kitchen witchery, and put your love into it, put your magic into what you cook. And remember all these little things that your grandma or mom told you. Add
Mhm.
a little pinch of salt for more sweetness, like I said, like that.
And let me mention too, before we leave, that the best meals I've ever had were what we call fresh out of the garden, and that's when the corn was in. We had lettuce in, tomatoes, and Granny had the best. She had the best dressing, and she called it her wilted lettuce salad. So basically, it was just fresh lettuce, and then she had bacon grease, and she had a little vinegar and a little sugar, and she would mix that together. And I don't know, it was great. It was amazing. And to this day, I have never had a meal as good as Granny's. I'm sorry. And I have eaten in some fancy French restaurants, but Granny's meals were always the best.
Yep, so she put her love in it, you know.
She did. She did. All right. Well, I think we're going to be wrapping this up. Is there anything else you'd like to say before
Think
we go?
we could probably do a whole other episode
Oh, yeah.
on Appalachian foods, but I think we came up with some good ones. Y'all let us know in the comments which you grew up eating. You know, what was your favorite meals that you remember? You know, and maybe even give us a recipe. But yeah, thank y'all for watching. Like and subscribe, follow, share, all that good stuff. We appreciate you so much.
And as I always say, thank you for being here, because without you, it would be a very lonely place. So we appreciate you. And if you have time, like and subscribe. You know, we put a lot of love into this show, and we hope that you can see that and feel that and get some information about the good old Appalachian Mountains where we're from. And we're proud of that. You know, it's a beautiful place to have grown up with, and a place that we're still in. I want my bones to be in these mountains whenever it's my turn to go. But until next time,
Stay
stay
curious.
curious. Thank y'all.